All right. Good morning, Doug. I hear you are getting these daily emails about this day in history, and some things have stuck out to me recently.
Yeah, I'm a long-term fan of the Encyclopedia Britannica. Although, you can't see them because there's paintings in front of them. I've got a set of the Encyclopedia Britannica in back of me, but I'm less and less of the Encyclopedia Britannica. It reached its high point, just like Western civilization itself did back in whichever edition, the 13th edition, back
Yeah,
in
yeah, like
12,
1911 or 12. Yeah.
something like that. Yeah, so that was the high point, and it's been going downhill since then. Uh, and I monitor it because I get their daily blog or communique, where, among other things, they tell you what happened this day in history, whatever day we choose. Uh, and I made a note that on August 16th, 1958, now they only have two things. They have a person and a thing or whatever that happened on this day in the past. And on August 16th, they noted that Madonna was born in 1958. So Madonna's kind of an old broad now, actually.
She
But
definitely,
um,
she definitely is. She definitely is. But she's
I
fighting
mean,
it.
she maintains her. I've got all the respect in the world for Madonna. I thought her music back in the 80s was great. I loved it. Uh, she keeps herself in great condition, I think, still.
Reinvented herself as an artist a couple of times.
Yeah. And she's totally self-made. She brought herself up from the lower middle class to becoming very wealthy and et cetera, et cetera. So that's the reason I bring it up is that despite the fact that I'm a fan of Madonna, not for current political views, which are completely absurd, like everybody in the arts, just about, but yet the Encyclopedia Britannica would think that that's the most important thing to acknowledge on August 16th. And what was really interesting was the day before, August 15th, they did not acknowledge one of the most important things in modern history when Nixon devalued the dollar and simultaneously in that same speech, which I heard live that day, incidentally, um, put on wage and price controls and capital control. He did all kinds of insane things, criminal things. And they didn't even mention that that was the day the dollar was.
Amazing.
Oh,
That's amazing.
so much for the Encyclopedia Britannica. But I'll continue to have them send their blog to me just because.
Yeah, but today seemed better, right? Today was something that really may have been significant in history. You were telling me about women's voting or the 19th Amendment. Is that right?
Yes, today in 1920, it was ratified as the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. And the question is, women voting, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Now, this is something that I doubt on this day of its anniversary, there's anybody else in the blogosphere discussing this because you can get canceled for this easy, I would think. But fortunately, neither one of us give a damn. So, uh, and and my feeling is it was a bad move.
Mm.
It's a bad move because, like almost everything, and as I've said many times before, one of the very few laws I believe in is the second law of thermodynamics. Says that everything degrades and falls apart over time, absent significant outside or adequate outside energy inputs. So it started out that an American could vote if he was free and 21 and a property owner and male. I think those were what boiled down to the four qualifications. Maybe I'm missing something. But now uh, everybody can vote. Uh, and not just women. And I guess I mean, I love women. Uh, but men are different from women. which is something else you can get canceled for saying. And one of the ways that they're different is women are more nurturing. They're mothers, they're caregivers. Through hundreds of thousands of years of evolution, it appears that they sat around the campfire and nurtured and went out and hunted. And it's just the way things were. Um, so having them vote means that they're going to vote for more loosey goosey, liberal kind of things. So that wasn't a good thing.
Yeah. And the other thing that stands out to me about it is that I just see this, what seems like an effort by the state uh, to atomize people and institutions. And so, the idea that where there was like one vote per household, one vote in the household, could not be divided by these political topics, that the household got one vote. I think that that's an important part of it too. And I think that there's now contention in the House where there might not have been before because, there wasn't this idea that decisions had been made independently by every participant or member of the House, including now, if you have children that are living at home that are older than 18, then, one household could have many votes.
You're right. It's 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 tended towards the political fracturing of the family, where in the past it was the head of the household's duty to vote if he wanted to vote, and wasn't the direct concern of other members of the household. But now, since they all have a say, they can all argue about voting. And of course, I'm against voting. That's a whole different conversation. But
Well, isn't there historically, wasn't there, because people might just view this as purely sexist, you just have the man, the patriarch, the family gets to vote, no one else does. It's not purely a sexist thing. It's the idea that it's a household vote. And I do believe that there were, in at least certain jurisdictions, where a widow, for example, where the male head of household had passed, she could still vote in their place. And so it wasn't just like strictly a sexist thing. It was the head of household vote more than it being about male and female, wasn't it?
I'd check and see what it actually said. Yeah, I think you may be right, actually. So these are a number of things. And also, 21, if you're going to have voting, is a fair age to vote, but it's been lowered to 18, when very definitely people's minds aren't fully formed. And in a lot of countries around the world, it's been lowered to 16, when people really can't think logically or rationally, don't have the experience to make momentous decisions at all. So it's all gone in the wrong direction. And of course, with the huge influx of migrants to the country now, it appears that many of them are going to get to vote in national elections as they're issued state driver's licenses, which are the de facto identification of citizenship at this point.
Right. Yeah. And the constant reduction of the standards, I guess, for who gets to vote, from a household, to multiple parties in the household, 21 to 18, 16 in other places you said. The question is, where does it end? And, if you can have 16-year-olds vote and you can have apparently 6-year-olds determining their gender, it certainly would seem to me that it would only be reasonable to allow 6-year-olds to vote. I mean, if they can make heavy decisions about their own identity, then why wouldn't they be able to vote? I mean, where does it end?
Well, that's true. Having had the unfortunate experience of being brought up as a Catholic and being told many things by the church, we were told that age 7 is the so-called age of reason. So that's the age of reason. Well, then maybe you ought to be able to vote when you're 7. I guess the church says that because that's when you can commit a mortal sin and burn in hell for the rest of eternity if you do. but I may have that wrong, or the theology may have changed. I'm not sure.
The theology may have changed. I thought you were born. I thought you were born in sin. So
Oh no, that's so. Well, I guess you are. That's why you have baptism. It
yeah,
cleanses you of original sin.
right.
But there are a lot of Protestant sects that believe that it can't be washed away. I think the
Really?
Calvinists,
Oh, the
yes,
Cal. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Calvinists believe you're going to burn in hell almost regardless of what you do.
Right. And you don't know whether or not you're that person who's born with that stain of sin, or whether or not you're chosen to be saved. Right? Is that the idea?
Exactly. Whether you've been chosen or not, it's predestined and so forth. It's
Yeah.
also very strange. I mean, people make these things up. It, it's as good as science fiction.
It really is. It
But
really is.
anyway, so
So I have heard the argument that women voting has led to a lot of people are suggesting, because a lot of this is this, the Andrew Tate side of the internet, that is putting forth this, this machismo form of masculinity that says women ought to know their place. But there are other kind of reasoned arguments, as you were making, about just the frame of reference that a woman would typically use in voting versus a man. Um, but I don't know. I mean, do you think so? I guess what I'm saying is, it seems to me that even this idea, this notion, which I never heard anyone ever say 10 years ago, is actually gaining steam, right? I've even heard women say this, that they women should have the right to vote. I've heard women say it. That's shocking to me.
hmm, yeah, probably a very free-thinking, rational woman might have said that. But my answer to the question is that as an ANCAP, uh, nothing important should be determined by voting. I mean, because it gets back to what the government should do: protect you from foreign aggressors, protect you from domestic aggressors with the police force, and have a court system to adjudicate these disputes that may arise without resorting to force. But the argument goes further. It's that although those are the three important things, that if you're going to have a government, that it should do: protect you from force, because government is force, but at the same time, those three functions are way too important to be left to the kind of people that inevitably get into government. So, but this is a whole different argument that we can go down. So that's the way I'd solve the problem. And what you said, I think, is quite correct. If you're going to vote for whoever it is, it ought to be the head of the household, man, woman, whoever it is. But it's typically the man. So that solves that problem and a bunch of other problems.
Mm. Well, talk about voting, and I think it's worth diverting here to a question we got from one of our viewers about wanting your take on Milei, who in Argentina, presidential candidate, we've talked about before, but who in this last week won the primary series of elections, and I guess the final election is set for October. And people were very shocked by this quote unquote white right wing extremist, winning the vote. What's your take on
It's, whenever you read anything about Millet in the American press, it always says right wing, ultra right wing, uh, describing him that way, which shows you the way these people think. They're either ignorant or they're vicious, because he's not right wing. He's an ANCAP. His views, as far as I can determine, are identical to my views, or your views for that matter. And it is amazing that in Argentina, and he is radical, he says exactly what he
it?
thinks. He doesn't pull any punches. I mean, there's nothing I've heard him say that I say, yeah, but you should have said, no, this guy's great. And, so, and the fact that the fact that in Argentina, uh, the person that wins the primary almost always, with, I think there was one recent exception, wins the election. So even with all of the uh, misinformation, disinformation that's being pumped out about him by the media, Argentines are so fed up and recognize the basic rationality of what he says, wanting to not just abolish the central bank. They're so sick of having their currency destroyed and being unable to save anything. But one of his best videos he's done, he's got magnetic things on a board, all these government agencies, and he goes down, Ministry of this, afuera is where he is. He's going to abolish all these things, which he should. So, if Millet wins, it's going to be one of the truly most important things to have happened this century, or maybe forever. People actually elected ANCAP, who has explained exactly what he's going to, and he will do it. He will do it. Now, I'm afraid they might kill him, or each state will try to make it impossible, illegal. Who knows? But it's a nice sign.
It's a great sign. I'll find I'll either try and edit in a short video from Twitter for people to be able to see. It's a translated bit with him where you can kind of hear how direct he is in attacking the politicians.
A ver, yo creo que el gran problema argentino es un problema cultural. Es decir, esta es una sociedad que está infectada de socialismo. Y lo que hay que lograr es sacar el socialismo de la cabeza de la gente, ¿sí? Y los principales promotores de estas ideas son los políticos. Te propongo que veas lo que fueron las declaraciones de Graciela Camaño. Se supone que uno de los mejores dirigentes de Argentina. ¿Sabes contra quién van? Contra los liberales. Porque los liberales somos los únicos que le enrostramos a los políticos que ellos no son la solución, que ellos son el problema. Los políticos son una suerte de sociópatas que quieren hacernos creer que nosotros somos inválidos mentales, inválidos en todo sentido, porque no podemos vivir si no fuera por ellos. En realidad, los que no pueden vivir sin nosotros son ellos. Es decir, si el país se separara entre los que producimos de un lado y del otro lado, queda la mierda de los políticos, los sindicalistas, todo este conjunto de parásitos se hunden, se mueren. Separemos la Argentina, en la Argentina del Norte y Argentina del Sur. ¿Sabes qué? Los que estamos dispuestos a laburar nos vamos a la parte más pobre del país, le dejamos vaca muerta, todo. Aun cuando se quedaran con todo, se van a hundir estas ratas porque no sirven para nada. En cambio, los que laburamos y sabemos ganarnos la vida, ¿sabes qué? Nos va a ir bien. Nosotros somos gente de bien, gente que labura, y no vivimos abogando por la envidia, el odio, el resentimiento, el robo, sí, el trato desigual frente a la ley, que es esa inmundicia de la justicia social, que es lo más injusto que existe, porque implica robarle a una persona el fruto de su trabajo para dárselo a quien a mí se me da la gana. Pero ¿de dónde salieron esta manga de sátrapa? ¿Sabes por qué? Porque además en todo ese proceso, no solo que destruyeron la economía, empobrecieron a la gente, ¿sí? Desde el año 70 hasta ahora el Estado se triplicó y multiplicaron por 6 el número de pobres, ¿sí? ¿Y sabes quiénes fueron los únicos que progresaron acá? Los políticos. Entonces, ¿saben qué? Quieren, digamos, quedarse en este país, ¿saben qué? Tienen que identificar el enemigo son los políticos. Hay que ir contra los políticos. Ellos son nuestros enemigos, ellos son los que nos hunden en la pobreza, ellos son los únicos que progresaron con este verso de la justicia social y la redistribución del ingreso. La verdadera redistribución del ingreso fue desde los que laburamos a los parásitos de los políticos. A ver, digamos, ¿por qué nació el liberalismo? Para salir del yugo opresor de los monarcas. Digamos, esta casta que tenemos son como los monarcas y ni siquiera se autoheredan. Son los mismos que estaban en el 2001. No se fue ninguno, estos chorros se quedaron todos. Y hay más, porque además se multiplican, porque tenés que agregar la parentela, sí, porque además tenés que agregar la amante, porque tenés que agregar la familia del amante, y crece, y crece, y crece. Y el bolsillo, digamos, de lo que producen, digamos, es cada vez más chico. O sea, entonces no puede ser que en un país sí le vaya mejor a los parásitos de la política que al tipo que produce. Es decir, no te puede ir mejor, ¿sí?, siendo un parásito de la política que no produce nada y que cuando hace algo lo único que hace es daño. Porque una de las cosas que pasa cada vez que interviene el Estado, se genera lo que se llama el fallo del Estado. O sea, fíjate esto, los planes contra la pobreza, ¿qué hacen? Generan más pobres. Mira el caso argentino.
It is truly radical, truly revolutionary, the things he's saying. And it will be interesting what happens there. In the short term, the peso continues to get crushed. It's now at 7.35 right now.
Argentina must be, at this point, the cheapest country in the world. So if you want to have some fun, get on a plane and go and visit. And I think you're going to be shocked how cheap things are. And if Milei wins and dollarizes the economy, it'll take him a while probably. And I've got to say that I introduced him to Steve Hanke, who is a professor at Johns Hopkins, who's the world's leading guy for this type of thing. He didn't know that. And it turns out that Bill Bonner's people in Buenos Aires introduced him to Macri, who he didn't know either. So he's a genuine outsider, which is really amazing. So anyway, you should get on a plane and take advantage of a delightful country where you'll be embarrassed because things are so cheap. You'll be embarrassed.
Yeah, it really is ridiculous. Okay. I can go on some of these other questions if you don't mind right now, or if you had other like to address, what would you like to do?
Oh, why not? The only other thing that I was thinking about, I made a note here the other day about Charlize Theron. Not only really beautiful, but she's a very, very good actress. And kind of following the current Hollywood model, she adopted an African boy. I saw a picture of him. It looks like he's 10 or 12, I'm guessing. And she had him dressed up in a pink dress. And he looked to me in that picture, he looked to me a little bit unhappy. So apparently he's trans. He decided he was a girl, or she decided for him, much more likely that he was a girl. And it's completely insane. And my guess is that kid I don't know if she's modified him physically or not. I certainly hope not. But if this continues, the kid is going to hate her. And there's probably going to be a matricide in the future when he gets so pissed off that she ruined his life. So, but this is kind of a viral sickness in Hollywood among these classes, adopting kids, especially from another race, and then modifying their gender.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. But Doug, you're the racist, you know?
Well, of course. That's right. Because I sympathize with that poor African kid. I really do.
It's ridiculous. And I mean, there will be, it's hard to say what form it'll take, but it's hard to imagine a world where there's not some reckoning for what's been done to a lot of kids in the last several years around this issue. The irreparable harm that's been done.
And from the picture I saw with Charlize and her adopted son, this kid looked like he was a natural athlete. I mean, even at 10 or 12, looked like he's going to have the build of somebody like Mike Tyson, powerful looking kid. So what are the chances he wants to be a girl? I mean, this has got to be his mother committing an actual crime against humanity on this poor kid.
It really is. I mean, what people don't understand is that kids really want to please the parent when they're young. And so whatever they think, whatever they kind of track onto that the parent wants to see happen, they like naturally gravitate to it at a certain age. And it's impossible for me to imagine that some kid, 8, 10-year-old comes to this on their own without seeing it reflected as a desire within the parents. It just seems impossible.
Yeah, pretty much.
Not sadistic. I mean, it's just actually evil, I think. It's just,
it's actually evil. And evil, I don't believe in the devil, but I do believe in evil. And it actually exists in the world, and it's being promoted by a whole class of people.
the abuse of innocence is, especially in this, some long, drawn out, perverse and forever damaging way like this is an evil act. Yeah, there's no way I couldn't.
Yeah, so, it really is. It really is. Taking, young kids and doing things to them is just totally beyond the pale.
Oh, okay. So let's see. Let me get to another question. Yeah, you must discuss South Africa in your home, Doug, because of your family's uh, origins there. So, what do you think will happen in South Africa over the next 2 years? Expecting a collapse, balkanization? I mean, you see things constantly getting worse. Does it come to a head?
Well, uh, things are getting worse in all ways, I think. In Europe and North America, we're actually seeing the slow motion collapse of civilization, not just Western civilization, but civilization itself. Uh, and I think it's much worse in South Africa and Africa generally. Um, all over the country. Yeah, they have electric blackouts 8, 10, 12 hours a day. Uh, and there's all kinds of problems. There's a group. It's a relatively small group, but they can fill a big stadium with people that are saying things like "kill the Boer." Uh, Look, it's a country with 40, 50 million people. Almost all of them are blacks now because the whites are in full flight out of the country, just like in Rhodesia, uh, which when I first went to Rhodesia, which was during the war there, population of the country was about 3 million, of which about 250,000 were Europeans. Now, if you go back to Zimbabwe, I'm not sure, but out of that 250,000, maybe there's 5,000 whites left, probably less, probably a lot less, and about 13 million blacks. And it used to be breadbasket of Africa, and now it's the basket case, not the breadbasket, but the basket case of Africa. Same thing is going to happen to South Africa. There's no doubt in my mind, and it's going to be the South African whites are leaving wholesale. Now, we have a member of our file group we talk to once in a while.
Hey,
Yeah, and he lived, and that is the most stable and the nicest place in South Africa. It's actually quite nice. He's a European with a Belgian passport, I forget. And he can pick up and leave anytime with no inconvenience, have bank accounts and property and whatever in Europe. But Afrikaners can't do that as easily. So this is not going to end well. It's not good.
what do you think? He suggested the possibility that maybe it's his hope that the Western Cape secedes somehow, separates itself from the rest of South Africa. Was that a possibility?
Well, I'd like to see it happen. I think it'd be wonderful. Just like in the same way as I'd like to see the southern Brazil break off from the rest of Brazil, which I think is going to happen because they're so totally different. And it's like Bolivia should break into two countries, one around Santa Cruz and the other one around the hell's the capital? Bolivia. It's Quito, that's Ecuador. It's La Paz. They hate each other. I mean, 500 years after the Spanish conquest, you still got in South America people that identify as the conquered and the conquerors. So a lot of these countries, the only way you can solve the problem is by breaking up. The U.S. is going to break up. I mean, I'm convinced of that. A lot of countries in Europe are going to break up. Russia is going to break up. And it's going to happen all over the world, which is wonderful. It's just the opposite of what the World Economic Forum people want to see. They want to see the whole world become under one government. It has nothing to do with the family of man and kumbaya and all that. It has to do with, they want to rule the rest of the world because they're psychotics that really just believe in power. So, anyway, yes, the answer to the question is South Africa should break up. And, it was long said that South Africa's got 14 tribes, 2 white ones, which was the English and the Afrikaners, and 12 black ones. And just like the English and the Afrikaners still don't get along that well together. They get along, but there's this background there. But the 12 major black tribes don't particularly get along either. They speak different languages. They've got different cultures, different traditions, and it's not one big happy family among the blacks either.
Yeah, it's important to note. Yeah. Well, kind of a related question from one of our file members. He asked you to comment on an article. The article is titled "Complex Systems Won't Survive the Competence Crisis." So when you said it's not just a Western civilization, it's a civilization problem, I think this kind of gets to it a little bit. And certainly the issues in South Africa apply here too. I'll summarize the article and just ask you to comment on it. Essentially, it says that starting in the US around in the 60s, maybe with the Civil Rights Act, that there was a subtle switch first from objective meritocracy, standards of testing, that kind of stuff, like the SAT, for instance, across all occupations, disciplines in the US is the key to our, I guess, institutional strength. It switched to softer things focused on, diversity, among other things. And that's gone to a point now where there are major universities like Harvard Law, which has gotten rid of the LSAT, which is the test you had to take to the law school in the past. There are medical schools that are getting rid of the MCAT, which is the medical one required for that. They've lowered the standards around air traffic controllers, for instance, to make sure that they're getting, it's more representative, per se. And so they make the case in this article fundamentally that there has been a replacement of other social interests of competency, which did rule the day for at least a period of time. And that the world that we live in today is a series of complex systems overlaying each other. And a complex system, one in of itself, is a fragile system that it needs good management, if nothing else, to maintain itself and new energy wars. When you overlay them on top of each other, it sets you up for a disaster as there's a crisis in competent people. If you add to that the boomers retiring, which have held these jobs for a long time, understand a lot of institutional knowledge about, you remember things like when there was a colonial pipeline hack, where basically shut off most of the natural gas to the eastern seaboard. It was a ransomware attack and, so a computer attack. And I remember the CEO was brought before Congress to testify on it. And they asked the CEO if there was a way to manually override it because it was just a software issue. And he said, yes, you could manually override it. Unfortunately, though, the people who knew how to do that were retired, no longer work there. So that's one clear view into like these things happening. They also in this article talk about, these close call incidents on runways have like really spiked, et cetera, et cetera. So anyways, you have this. So this definitely, if you look at South Africa, they're further ahead down this road with the same sort of policies where competence wasn't really the issue, or not the driving force, at least. And I guess, what do you think about that idea? Competence crisis, a competence crisis is going to lead to, if nothing else, a reduction of basically people giving up on maintaining these systems or a collapse.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of evidence. I think it's overwhelming evidence that's happening. I may have mentioned this in one of our past podcasts, but I'll mention it again because I may not have mentioned it. A relative of mine on my wife's side of the family, she's the Afrikaner, was an engineer on the railroads, not the choo-choo train type engineer, but the one that lays the tracks, fixes the engines, and that type of engineer. And when their Black empowerment program took over, he had to be replaced by a Black guy. And the idea was the Black guy was very politically connected, but knew nothing about anything. And he was supposed to train the Black guy in the job. But the Black guy, realizing that he was in this wonderful position where he could wear a pocket protector and carry a clipboard around and that type of thing, figured he didn't need to do that. He could just have the Mazingo tell the Mazingo what to do, and the Mazingo would do it. And so, Chris later quit because it was just impossible. was just impossible. He just couldn't work and do stupid things that this uneducated person. And this is happening all over South Africa. And it's happening here in the U.S. too. It actually is. There is a blog. Maybe you can link to that because I sent it to you from Larry Johnson, who's a member of another Zoom group that I'm on. He's got a very interesting background. So you all ought to subscribe to his blog when you see this. It's free. So it's very worthwhile reading on many subjects. He's an ex-military guy, an ex-CIA guy, of all things. But he's made the point in his recent blog that the Russians have not lost this culture. They have all kinds of problems, but they haven't really lost this culture of being able to do things the way Americans have, which is, I think, quite interesting. And for what it's worth, Russia is a major destination of South African farmers that are making the chicken run too. So it's all kind of adding up. People wind up wanting to go where they feel welcome and where they feel comfortable. And of course, it's always a problem when you have to move to a country where you have to learn a new language. But at the same time, if you're diligent at it, you can actually learn all the basics of any new language in a matter of months, if you're diligent.
Hmm.
I've tried to learn Spanish properly for 40 years, haven't succeeded, but I've never been diligent. My wife, on the other hand, speaks fluent Spanish, and she's diligent, and she's only learned it in a couple of years. So just going to share.
Yeah. And I think what you're saying about these people moving, when we talk about Chris leaving the railroad, that's another thing you talk about in the article is that the competent, productive people just bail, they bail out because they just can't, they find it intolerable. They talk about that in this article too. And, ultimately, if you are competent and productive, you want to go to a place where competency and productivity is rewarded or at least not punished.
Well, and it's actually worse than that because if you live in a pre-industrial society, it's not important to have a broad degree of competence, and the competence that you need, you learn from your father, and you do what he did. So it wasn't so terribly important. But today, where things are very, very complex, and one complex thing is important for the proper operation of another complex thing, which is important for the operation of another complex thing. So the supply chain problem. And if it breaks down at any point, you're in a lot of trouble. And with people today, they think that going to college will put them on the gravy train. So they either they actually take things like gender studies and political science and sociology and completely worthless subjects, and then expect to get a job or be hired, and sometimes they are. Actually, who's going to do all the important things that keep civilization together? It seems like a small pool of people are maintaining an increasingly large pool of useless mouths.
Right. That's where you see that these, you see roads and you see the infrastructure around the US disrepair. You see power outages. There was an article I guess it was an opinion article in the LA Times a few weeks ago, making the case that people should just get used to a world where blackouts exist and how actually it'd be good for global climate change.
Oh yeah, it would. That's true because we'll all be living on sunshine and wind. That's it's a lot of this relates back to the growing influence of government. Government's always been with us, but it used to be a tiny influence. It used to be a relatively minor nuisance. It took no taxes, no income taxes. They didn't exist. No sales taxes, no value-added taxes. I mean, it was basically import duties and excise taxes. So it wasn't a problem, but as it's grown, it's got to make itself important, and it's overweening right now. And it's corrupted everything in our society, including education, where everybody's supposed to go to college and take crap courses and indebt themselves usually, so that once they have this huge debt, they've become like serfs where they have to get a job, stay in one place, and pay off that debt before they get a mortgage and then pay off that debt. Used to be that people saved up to buy a house, bought a house for cash. That's actually what used to happen.
Well, it's impossible now. It's totally impossible anyway, because housing prices are so absolutely incredibly high and the dollar is in such bad shape that, I mean, if you look at what it would take for most people, what you'd have to have for a down payment or buy a house 30 years ago or 50 years ago, as a percentage of people's income compared to today, it's just most young people just have given up on the idea that they'll even be a homeowner. Honestly.
And how do you even save for your down payment when the interest rate that you get on your savings, assuming you can save anything, is eaten away by the inflation of the currency you're forced to save in? I mean, this is a formula for disaster. And I've been saying this for many, many years. And we're kind of coming to the real crux of this thing now. But
Mess. It's a mess.
the ongoing collapse of Western civilization right before our very eyes. It's as if we were Romans that were living in the early 5th century. You could see it happening. What are you going to do about it? There's nothing that a well-to-do Roman could do about it at that point.
Except make sure they're not in front of the steamrollers that's coming through town, right?
That's right. That's what you can do. And you can save yourself and maybe save your kids. But I don't know when the steamroller is going to run out of fuel and stop crushing things.
Yeah. I think it's just getting started, to be honest. So it's got a long way to go.
I think you're right. You're exactly right. But the average guy out there doesn't realize that we've jumped off the top of a 100-story building. And even when you're approaching the 5th floor, hey, so far, so good.
Exactly. And I mean, that's the sentiment I'm talking to lots of people. I'm in the US now, like you. I've been able to spend time with lots of different people. And basically the sentiment is very positive. Like everything's fine. I mean, there's no worry about, some people got themselves a little financially overwhelmed with home improvement projects. I run into a few of those. Actually, it's kind of funny, but they don't see a dark future ahead. They feel like it's fine. Everything's gonna be fine.
Well, I hope they're right. I really do. Hey, listen, I like good times more than bad times, even if the good times are artificial. I like them more than bad times.
Yeah, yeah, but I mean, it's just hard to imagine how. I mean, if nothing else, they experienced 10% inflation last year. Like, isn't that they don't see the eroding power of that to their lifestyle, to their standard of living? I mean, these are they don't have to have a collapse scenario to see that it's trending in a direction that does not improve the standard of living for them. They're just paying attention.
I can't wait to see what happens, assuming that we're not canceled. A year from now, the summer, I guess the summer before the national elections next year. I think we could already be living in a very different world by then. I hate to make a prediction like that, but the odds are high, I'd say.
They are. I'm hedging that with, still planning on spending some time in the summer in the RV in the mountains here. Hopefully everything will be fine, but that will seem like a good idea. But it seems feels on the precipice at this point to me. And the election.
My wife takes a gloomier view of what's going to happen than I do. And she says, I don't think we should come back to the US next summer.
Well, luckily you can make the call at the time.
Yeah.
Okay, I have one more question for you here from a member of our file. He says, in a world where perfect money exists, what in Doug's mind is the role of debt in the world economy?
There's nothing wrong with debt. as long as it's saved capital, which is lent voluntarily. That's fine. I mean, it's a great way to make capital available to entrepreneurs and businessmen that need capital from others that have sequestered it and saved it. So debt is great. But in a free market economy, debt would have to be prudently used. I mean, look, it used to be that when a loan was made, it was self-liquidating or it wasn't made. It was like you'd loan a farmer for a seed against the crop that was coming in. Crop comes in, debt's paid off, self-liquidating. That's the kind of debt you want. And also the debt is not just signature loan stuff, but is secured by a specific asset. I mean, this is why we talk about the bond market. The bond market doesn't exist. Bonds today are all debentures, which aren't bonds against a specific asset, but they're just generalized debt of a corporation. So the whole debt thing has changed. I mean, it used to be if you if you wanted a house, you saved up and you built or bought a house. That's the way you did it. More recently, older people still understand, hey, if you want a car, you save up and you buy a car. Maybe it's a used car to start with, but you don't buy the average car in the US is what? I saw the number the other day.
The current new car loans are $800 a month. I saw that yesterday. Yeah.
And those are probably 7-year loans, which most of them are these days. It's like a mortgage. Used to be you could only get a 5-year mortgage on a house. So all this debt has actually turned people into serfs because they can't default on the debt or they're going to lose their house. They're going to lose their car, their student loan stuff. So it's made you to stay at the job and the place where you are to pay off all this debt that you've accumulated. If I was a conspiracy guy, I'd say this is like a conspiracy to enslave free people.
Much less expensive way to enslave people too. I mean, you're not responsible for feeding them. They're responsible for feeding themselves. It's not your housing, their housing.
Exactly. I mean, you don't have to monitor and whip them. Well, they're all monitored, of course, but it's actually a work of genius.
It really is. It really is. There's more slaves today than have ever existed on the face of the earth. That's for sure.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with debt, but I would make it in itself. That's how you get interest, and that's how you become wealthier. But there's a difference between consumer debt and capital productive debt. And the one, it's consumer debt, where you're living out of your future for things right now. And the other is you're investing to produce more. Those are the two kinds of debt. I'm not being very clear.
Yeah, no. So productive debt versus consumption debt. Consumption debt, as in, for example, the $1 trillion now in credit card balances that Americans have. Almost certainly all of that is consumption debt.
Almost all of it, yeah. And these people are paying
22%. 22.
It's amazing. It's amazing. And of course, all government debt is consumption debt too. I mean, they don't produce anything.
Yeah. So he had a real follow-up question. He says, does Doug believe that a decrease in debt would actually decrease or actually increase real standards of living for the average person?
I think I've answered the question already. Depends on the kind of debt you have. And, if we had a sound currency, look, when you have a depreciating currency, that's another thing, one more thing that encourages people to get into debt because they're hoping inflation is going to destroy the debt faster than the interest is going to accumulate.
But when you look at people's living standard today, most people in the US, if they didn't have access to consumer debt, I think that most of them would consider that their standard of living would be greatly reduced because they wouldn't have their second car. They wouldn't, they would be renting instead of paying a mortgage, or, they wouldn't be able to go on a vacation this summer or whatever,
Exactly. That's exactly right. And that's what they should do. They should forget about their second car, forget about all these consumer items, pay off their debt, and start building from a sound foundation. Because if you don't, you're going to be washed away. You're going to be a leaf floating on a rapidly flowing stream going over a waterfall.
And if not that, I guess the lesser would be that you're just on the debt treadmill, constantly running faster and faster to try and stay ahead of this tsunami that's coming toward you, the debt that you created for yourself. And
Yeah, this is going to be so much fun to watch. Well, it won't be that much fun, but it'll be more fun watching it on my widescreen from a estancia in South America than it is going to be out my front window here in the U.S.
100%. I think that one of the things that about debt that I think that people, when I even talk to members of my family about it, they cannot really get their mind around is for especially consumer debt. The idea is that they're basically living their future today. And, it feels like it gives them things that they want now. That of course they can convince themselves they deserve to have now. But I think that there's an inability to understand the actual cost of that, but they actually are stealing from their future in a way that it should be criminal. If there's someone else that would be criminal.
Yeah. It's the time preferences of Americans in particular can become so distorted that they think it's okay to say, I want it all and I want it now. And worse than that, and I deserve it.
Deserve it. That's the key.
Of course, I'm personally of the belief everybody winds up getting what they deserve. And we'll find out if that is in the near future.
Exactly. Yep. All right. Okay. Well, this is great, Doug. Good conversation. I think we'll leave it there and we'll be back next week.
Okay, Superman.
Thanks.